little bit late. Call the meeting to order. Secretary, call the roll.
Directors Huang, here. Akbari, Sethy,
Here.
Reed,
Here.
and Gunther.
Here. Different. I think I'll leave it. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Special workshop regarding AMI. Public comments for matters of this notice special meeting. Are there any members of the public present? No. Hearing no comments in the public, we will move on to item number 4.
Thank you, President Gunther. Item number 4 involves the advanced metering infrastructure procurement process, and this workshop will focus on ongoing and planned activities related to the project. Specifically, we'll be talking about overview of the AMI procurement approach, the proposal evaluation methodology, and the next steps going forward. This is a project that board members have been very engaged on and very interested in. So staff is excited to explain with our consultant what our proposed approach is regarding the procurement of a very costly project, and we appreciate any and all feedback. And because it is a board workshop, we are not taking such a formal approach like we would at a regular board meeting. So if any members of the public would like to make comments, we will accept them as well. So with that, I will introduce our Manager of Engineering and Technology Services, Mr. Stevenson, who will be our MC for this evening.
I'd like to make one comment for the board. I'd like to kind of keep ourselves focused tonight. In case the board has forgotten, there is something happening about 6 o'clock. I think some people might have.
Just as a point of order, is Director Akbari expected here tonight?
Director Akbari will not be attending this evening's board meeting.
Okay.
Well, thank you. And as Mr. Shaver points out, the purpose of this workshop is to provide a little bit more information about the AMI procurement process that we plan to begin shortly. And staff and our EMA consultant team will review the overall procurement process, our planned methodology for evaluating the proposals to be received, and even a high-level review of some of the weighting that will be used in scoring those proposals. The board has expressed a good deal of interest in many of the technical, financial, and contractual details of the AMI project. And while staff is pretty comfortable that we understand the board's priorities, we still wanted to dive a little bit deeper into the procurement process plan and some of those details so that we can confirm that we're on the right track with the board. So we're certainly open to any input or feedback about the process that we're planning, and would like to certainly understand the board's interests if there are any changes needed and so forth. So with that, I'll introduce Ben Egger, our AMI project manager, who will get us started and also will be introducing our EMA consultant team shortly. So Ben.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Stevenson. Good evening, members of the board and staff. Tonight we're here to talk about the AMI procurement process. Introduce myself again. I'm Ben Egger. I'm the project manager for the AMI, leading the AMI project in the district. We've talked a lot in phase 1 about the project and a lot of the preliminary work we did. We talked about the business case for the entire range or spectrum of AMI solutions we're anticipating under the project in this procurement. And tonight we're going to talk about how we intend to solicit and identify the best value AMI solution for the district. Right, so here's what I've set as the objectives for tonight. To review the AMI procurement process, including the draft evaluation criteria, which really should reflect the district's priorities. for the AMI system, and receive board guidance on these 2 items. So, quick outline of the topics. I'll do a quick introduction. We'll get stuck into the procurement, how we're going to procure that AMI solution, the strategy for procurement and the timeline, and then the proposal data, what we're expecting in those proposals. And then I'll hand it over to Joel, and he's going to walk us through the evaluation and overview of the evaluation process before I do our next step. I've included, I think everyone has a set of handouts. It looks like it's printed double-sided. This is my, I guess, apologies for the amount of abbreviations that we have when we describe AMI systems. So I would say tear that sheet out and keep it next to you if I'm doing too much technical babble. But yeah, feel free to pull me up. Co-presenting with me tonight is Joel. You all know Joel. He's been with us since the start of our AMI project. And also supporting Joel will be Mark and Sharon. Mark, the project manager for EMA, and Sharon, the principal in charge. All right, so we've talked about goals and business drivers a lot in phase 1, and we reviewed those and defined those in our discussions in phase 1, and I certainly just wanted to highlight the fact that we're bringing those forward into phase 2. These are the lens that staff are using when we develop the RFP to make sure that we're going out to solicit and procure an AMI system that is in line with our goal and the business strategies that we've identified. Quick overview of the timeline. You've seen this slide before as well. Not much has changed here except the date. We're moving along. We've made a lot of progress on the AMI project, and today we're up to the evaluation criteria, which we promised to be a touch point for the board to make sure that staff have adequately set that and receive some input and guidance on what we've established there. And yeah,
I have 2 questions on this slide.
yeah, sure.
Do it as briefly as you can. So we're already into 2019, and we have public outreach there as one of our ongoing efforts and business process reengineering. So what are we doing on those 2 elements?
Yeah, good point. Those are 2 project elements that really we identified are going to survive the entire length of the project. So for public outreach, as you know, in phase 1 we set up a public outreach plan that we presented, I think it was May of 2018, or this time last year. And so we put together a plan. In phase 2, it's really translating for this part of phase 2, which is the procurement effort. It's really translating a lot of that plan into the AMI procurement documents to make sure that our contractor, our solution provider, will be in lockstep with our public outreach plan. As you know, there's multiple threads to our public outreach approach, and in April we had a look at logos and how we're identifying the project to convey value to the customers, and as well that will be an identifier that we'll use on our contractor to create, I guess, harmony between the district and the contractor for the customer's perspective.
So at this early stage, are we actually doing anything?
So we've not gone out
community?
into the public in a big way. There's been some information in the Aqueduct. We've participated. This project has presented at a couple of community meetings and so forth. But there's not been a big public outreach push just yet.
Right. Yeah. Good point. And so, yeah, once we get into the proof of concept, that's when some of the bigger items will start to be pushed out. So we'll start doing some open house meetings, and with the proof of concept areas, if you remember from our December workshop, there's really 2 main proof of concept areas. So we'll do an open house meeting in both of those areas up in Warm Springs area and down around the New Mall area. And that will continue throughout the full deployment. So yeah, once we get through procurement, it's really execute when it comes to public outreach. Right, and then business process reengineering. So in phase one, there was, as you know, there was a lot of preliminary design discussions about what this AMI system is going to look like, how it's going to, what's going to look and feel like for staff and for the customer experience. And so the business process reengineering was really about understanding our current processes, understanding what an AMI world might look like, and now in phase two, we're sort of putting those two together. We still don't know what the final solution is until we finish our procurement, but we're certainly building towards that with our staffing analysis and our business process reengineering plan that we're putting together. Again, we'll start to execute that plan as we get into the proof of concept deployment. And there will be a continual process of refining that, because while we think we know what that's going to look like, there'll be refinements as we live and breathe in my world.
So one follow-up question. Is this primarily an effort where we are engaged with Kayenta, other vendors that we deal with, or are we reliant on our EMA consulting firm here for some of this too?
Right. Business process reengineering is a joint effort between the district and the EMA. They're our guide in reengineering those processes, and that is something that EMA have a lot of experience in and have done for us in the past also.
Yeah, so we sort of redesign our business processes in many areas throughout the district, right? Meter maintenance and IT processes and customer service and so forth. So we re-engineer those processes, and then we'll have to work with entities like Kayenta to actually implement those changes. So they'll be separate, and you'll see some of that tonight in terms of additional contracts that we're going to have to enter into and so forth. There'll be other work to implement those process redesigns, but the redesign work is being done as part of the project so that it's all consistent with the overall plan.
And a final question on the business process side. Have we already covered those costs in our contract so far with EMA, or are we forecasting, big expenditures down the road to integrate everything here?
Right. Certainly our approach with EMA has been to extend their services to the point where we can predict the scope. And so for phase one, we knew that we had to do this, we had to understand the business processes, so we're able to define that, and they certainly had all the understanding of what an AMI system, living and breathing that, would be. So that has continued so we've extended that service up until the point of procurement. Once we know that, once we've selected that system and procured that, then any adjustments that would be needed for that exact system that we procure, we would extend the contract with the EMA to cover that next phase of the project. So a lot of the work has been done to date, but there will be further expenditure to fine-tune.
Right, and if you look at the continuum, there's 3 phases. And so all 3 phases are contemplated in the contract with EMA. It's just that we haven't awarded the future phases, nor done a real deep dive into defining or redefining scope items because there's uncertainty further out. So for instance, we're in phase 2. We've awarded the first chunk of phase 2, but the second chunk of phase 2 has to do with the proof of concept implementation. And what that really looks like in terms of in detail will depend on the system that we put into place, right? And we have to complete the procurement. So the first part of phase 2 is the procurement. The second part of phase 2 is the proof of concept. We would go back to the board and request amending the EMA contract to include those proof of concept related services at the time that scope has been further defined. And the same thing goes with phase 3. And as you recall, phase 3 is the district-wide implementation. So it's being done in steps.
And that's in the best interest of both the district and EMA in that we can define the scope of their work and they don't have to include risk for any outside of scope creep that happens there, so we can get the best.
And we keep them honest.
And we can keep them honest. Yes, so.
Like that the whole time.
Sorry, I interrupted you.
That's it. I'm done.
Quick item, on this chart. When will the board have an opportunity to make a go, no-go decision?
I guess that is...
Put on the whole thing on hold.
Right. My understanding is that that is the board's option at any point in the process. We're just bringing the board along, presenting the details that we know and making sure that we're objectively reviewing all things AMI and what the AMI system will look like. So yeah.
There'll be a big milestone where you see results of procurement in the timeline. There will be a big milestone there where the board will have much more complete information about what this really means for the district, right? For costs and so forth. And so that will be an important decision point.
Great, as long as it's helpful, rather than saying any time, you really do need that milestone for board input to confirm and proceed on. Today, for example, today we're looking at process in this meeting. It's not a decision-making issue forum.
I don't want to contradict my fellow director here, but, you know, in all honesty, I feel like we've made the decision on go, no go. We're going forward with AMI. So we're trying to figure out through the procurement process what our choices are.
Right. It's certainly heavily represented in the district's strategic plan that AMI is a strategic goal going forward.
I mean, this is a board decision that we've already made.
Well, it's a timeline issue, and two comments stuck with me with the initial presentation from EMA. The first was that just because you can doesn't mean you should. And the second is that technology is turning over every 3 years, giving it a half-life of probably less than that. So when we look at the numbers and what's coming down the road, and it's going to be a different environment even in a year from now, or 6 months from now, that when we look at what I believe will be over $25,000 per user, that's going to be a difficult sell. You may have bought into that, but those numbers aren't for you yet, because we'll probably get about 2% of the people wanting to read their water bill on their cell phone. So it's a...
Well, not to belittle or stop the subject, but I also believe, as Director Sethy said, that we have made that decision. We're proceeding in this direction. That milestone certainly is we're going to get a cost, which presently we don't have. We're going to get the concept of how we're planning on carrying this out. But I think we have given staff direction to do this. That direction has been given. It's not a stop. We've given them direction to continue. Now, obviously, if it comes in at $100 million, then the answer would be, let's hold back.
Well, we've already
That's been decided.
We've committed to $40 million in our planning, and we'll see what the results are.
Right, and so those results of procurement, Representative, we're anticipating, the current schedule shows the results of procurement in the January timeframe, January 2020.
Sorry to have interrupted you, Ben.
No problem at all. No, this is a discussion. Right, so yeah, tonight we'll, for this phase of the project, for the majority of 2019, we're in the procurement phase and vendor selection, solution selection. And so yeah, that's what we're talking about tonight. Right, this is my last introduction slide, and I just wanted to anchor our presentation on the fact that really we've talked a lot about technology in the previous board discussions and board meetings. And tonight is focused on procurement and procurement, mechanics of procurement. So we're looking to buy a suite of business and customer service solutions. The technology is really interesting and fascinating, but we're looking for it to get the right technology that will deliver the results we want. Okay, so on to procurement and an overview of our procurement process. Right, so I'll start out by saying that there are a number of contracts required to deliver the AMI project. The big one is the AMI deployment contract, and that's the one that we're really going to focus on tonight. That is the large contract, but there'll be a number of supporting contracts that will be required to deliver the project. So if I'm calling the AMI deployment contract RFP number 1, the customer portal contract, which will be, I guess, the interface that customers will primarily interact with, will be another RFP number 2 that we'll be developing. And then to be able to integrate AMI with our existing CIS, our Customer Information System, Kayenta, then there are some modifications to make that AMI compatible. We're a Kayenta shop, so that will be a sole source contract to Kayenta to make those modifications. And then there's construction support. We'll need technical guidance through phase 3, the proof of concept in phase 3. And so that would be in the form of an MSC email. Mr. Stevenson mentioned that when we went out for professional services to support this project, we did go with a cradle-to-grave approach, that we wanted professional services support that could support us through the entire process and that continuity and the benefits of having that.
Does the first and second RFP go out concurrently, or are they in some sequence? And on the customer portal contract, is that covering all devices, PC to handheld and whatever?
Right, yeah, great question. So if the AMI deployment contract is sort of in that range that we've been talking, 29 to 33 million-ish, then the customer portal contract would be more like 100 to 200,000 per year is what we're anticipating there. And so that customer portal would be really a software as a solution, a SaaS-style model that would provide the interface for all 84,000 customers. I guess it's certainly true that some customers have multiple meters. But yeah, that customer portal would support all our customers. What's the timing of those two? So certainly our plan is to come to the board with a recommendation of not just the AMI contract, but all 4 of these contracts at the same time, so you can make a fully informed decision about what proceeding forward with AMI would look like. So as you're going to learn, the AMI procurement evaluation process is a lot longer lead than the customer portal process, is a lot shorter. So the release date of these contracts are kind of staggered, but the plan is to bring them all to the board on the same date, rather than a piecemeal.
I'll tell you where my biggest worry is. It's on the upgrade with Kayenta to our business processes. If we don't get that right, nothing works for us.
Right. There is...
So, just expressing some concern there.
Yep. A lot of things have to work for the AMI system to be successful in achieving our goals and business drivers. Right. But that's, I guess, my job to ensure that they all work.
And Ben, we are developing a Kayenta interface document that allows us to document exactly what we want Kayenta to do, and then we'll send that out to Kayenta to price the work. So we have a pretty good idea of the interfaces we need, the functionalities we want in order to complement some of those business process improvements.
That is really good to hear.
So yeah, we haven't submitted to Ben. I think it's coming probably this week or next week, but it's 90% done.
Oh, that's really good to hear.
So,
Okay, so this is a review slide. I think we've seen this slide once before, but what is RFP number 1? What is the AMI deployment contract? So it's going to be an RFP, and it's going to include all 3 elements. The AMI system, which would include getting the data from the meter all the way through the meter data management system and everything in between. The interfaces to CIS, the handheld required for maintenance of the system, data collection, etc. The metering elements, of course, there are a number of meters that need to be upgraded to be AMI compatible and a lot that need to be replaced. So there's a procurement piece of this as well. And then the other piece is installation. So there'll need to be an installation component to be able to install all the AMI system and metering system and to make sure it all works.
You use the term upgrading of existing meters.
Right.
Are any of our existing meters capable of supporting any of the AMI systems?
Yes, they are. As you know, the small meter, so all the large meters, there's an upgrade pathway for those. It's standardized on Badger, and so the large meter replacement program keeps the large meters up to date, and so those meters would just require a register retrofit. The small meter replacement program, as you know, is not going forward at the moment, and so there are a large number of meters that will require replacement. But there are some that have an upgrade pathway, which would just require replacing the register.
I thought we had restarted the meter replacement program.
No.
No, you're not. Okay.
Yeah.
So I have one thought here on this slide, and I brought it up with Bob and Ed, and I think you were copied on some of the emails. From my product management experience, I've had to go through a number of end-of-life programs where I was taking hardware products from out in the field, and then I went through one of 3 stages. They each have different certifications for reconditioning, refurbishing, or remanufacturing the product, and then reselling that product into lower tier, more cost-sensitive markets. And I was thinking with 85,000 meters, or maybe something less, we've got a big pool of meters that we could resell, even if it was at a deep discount of $10 to $20 per meter. That would give us $1 million to $2 million that would help on the ROI of the AMI program. And this is something I've done repetitively on product lines, and I wondered if our consultants, EMA, had any experience with this on pulling out the old product and what can be done with it.
Sure.
I understand that there's a certain salvage value, but sometimes when you've got a pool of product, let me make 2 points. In a pool of product, it can be in the interest of the original manufacturer to take it back and do exactly what I was saying. Or you could have a situation where you've got a third-party vendor who might want to deal with the product, something like that. And the last point I want to make is, in the response I received from Mr. Stevenson, this is kind of, from what I understand, this is kind of factored into the bid that we might be receiving from potential vendors. But to me, this is really kind of a hidden profit line item in there that we're not really aware of what's going on. And so I'm just wondering about this.
Sure. So 20 years ago, if we were talking about refurbishing meters, that was pretty much a utility standard practice 25 years ago. What they would do is they would take the meters from the field, even residential. They would pull the bottom off, remove the guts, which is a plastic measuring chamber. They would put a new one in, retest it, put it back in the field. So that was the standard practice probably 20 years ago. The cost of the meter has dropped dramatically. And as the cost of the meter drops and some of the labor cost, the handling cost to do that refurbishment has risen. Typically, most utilities are for residential meters, so that's 5/8 to 1 inch. The scrap value is better than the value of selling it, a refurbished meter. There is no major market for refurbished meters in the U.S. For residential meters, because of the low cost of a brand new meter.
Well, I even suggested in my email that I was delivering these kind of products to developing countries.
Right.
There was a ready market for it because it was one of those cost-sensitive markets, and
Sure.
they didn't mind having the old technology as they were migrating along. But let me just ask if you're knowledgeable about it. What is the scrap value of a meter?
It's about, so for a 5/8 meter, depending on the type, but they usually just give you an average. It's about $5. So if you do the math, you have a lot more 3/4. So you're probably in the $6 to $7 range, and then 1 inch would probably be in the $10 range. So when you add all that up, there's about 70,000 meters that would be removed. It's about $500,000. So I think based on some of the feedback you gave Mr. Stevens, we were going to add some line items to make sure the bidder recognizes that scrap value in the price schedule itself. So we would allow for them to put a negative value so the value of that is clear on the price schedule. So we haven't done that yet. We just got that feedback, and we thought that was a good idea.
I think it's a factor in our return on investment.
For sure.
That it's something that we may have overlooked in our earlier financial analysis.
Yeah, no, I think it was identified in an earlier business case, but I think it's a good way to sort of highlight the value that you're getting from some of that material that you've removed in the field. So,
great, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just to supplement that, a standard practice with large meters, which are much more costly, is still to refurbish them in place. That is the more cost-effective way to manage and maintain that population.
Well, at least we're getting $500,000 back.
Sure.
Yeah, and it'll be an upfront deductible item that we'll get a number on through procurement. Right. So the advantages of this strategy or this approach is that we have a single lead entity responsible for all the components. And that's not just supply and install, but also they're responsible for functionality. So making sure that the system works, not that they just installed it. So this is really the best way to keep them honest without putting the district in the middle of various entities. Right, I think I guess it is also one of the side benefits is that any synergies between the components we're able to evaluate. So if we go out and buy the best AMI system and the best meters, it may not mean that they have the best integration between the two. So any features that come from a combination of meter AMI system, we're now able to put value on that. Whereas if we did it separately, we would not.
Can I ask a question? I see an analogy here where we're buying a bundle. Now we have in the telecommunications industry where you buy a bundle. And some of those elements are really superior, and then you end up with some that are not as good. Will we have the opportunity at all to work with our single source vendor to make substitutions in their initial contract if we feel that a portion of that bundle is not up to needs to be improved? Maybe adequate, but could be far better.
Right. Great question. So We will be providing the functionality in the procurement process to provide alternatives. So meters is a great one, and I'll touch on this a little later, but there'll be a base bid, so they'll provide, I guess what they assume to be the best value meter product, but then we'll ask for some alternative meter products. So that will give the district the ability to evaluate the alternative and really make the determination about what truly is the best value for the district. And so for a manufacturer, say, that provides both PD meters and ultrasonics, then we would give them the avenue to provide a PD meter, a positive displacement meter, an ultrasonic meter, or some hybrid of the two. Should we not want to go for a full ultrasonic solution, we would have that data, that cost data, and also the benefits of the three.
As my understanding is this bundle will include not only the meter, but also the communication system to go with it.
Oh yeah, true.
So though that's, if one is strong and the other one's weak, do we have the opportunity to either bifurcate or substitute and request a different, at some point, to say, hey, we like this portion of it, but this portion doesn't.
We won't have the option to bid shop, but we nor will we have the option to tell the various entities you have to work with you.
Okay.
But we will certainly give them the ability to propose however they feel is the best value for the district. Right, and so coming to the procurement process, there's really 6 main steps, and we have had a quick look at this one before as well. So step 1 is the RFP development. That's certainly ongoing, and that's something I'm going to talk more about for the rest of my slides. And then there's the evaluation criteria that Joel, I'll hand it over to Joel, and he'll walk us through how the evaluation is going to work. Then there'll be a solicitation period of about 8 weeks, and then we'll be evaluating bids. And that evaluation process will be a tabletop evaluation of the written word, and then some demonstrations and interviews with the various proposing entities, for us to come up with an ultimate evaluated solution best value.
So Ben, I was trying to match each one of these steps to the calendar, and especially step 1. Where are we on the calendar right now?
Back it up. Right. So where are we right now? We're in here, and so right now we've developed a proposed evaluation criteria, and that's what we're presenting tonight to get some guidance on fine-tuning that. And the RFP is at approximately the 90% level. There's many pieces we're moving forward. It's quite a comprehensive document, as you can imagine.
When would we plan on issuing that? What's the issue date?
Sure, yeah. So the target date is June 19th to issue the RFP.
I will say that there are a number of variables in play right now that may result in that date moving, but that has been the target that staff's been working with.
Okay, so let's just assume for a minute the end of June.
Right.
You've got 2 more months on evaluation. You're into September now. 8 weeks beyond that, now you're into November. The proposed evaluation would be finished by the end of January of next year. So,
sorry, stepping back there. So we'd be putting out the RFP in mid-June, and so 8 weeks after that would be mid-August. And then another 2 months after that would be August, September, October. There'd be negotiations for about a month, which would put us into, late November, and then it takes months to put a staff report together and get it to us.
And
which
it's
puts us at-
possible that those negotiations may go longer than a month, just
Mm.
based upon the complexity of these proposals that we expect, and probably the numerous options that we'll be presented with.
I can imagine it would.
So the first two steps are not sequential. So staff is working on developing an evaluation criteria while we're also developing the RFP. I think that's where the timing got mixed up a little bit.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
One of my concerns with this approach is that I believe we're tying ourselves into a technology for at least the next 20 years, possibly longer, 30. As part of your evaluation criteria, will there be any credits given for someone who can suggest a path for staying up with the state of the art and being able to take advantage of the technological changes as they come about in a shorter time, within a year or two, so out to the 20, 30-year mark?
Yeah, that's an interesting concept. If I may, could I push that into our discussion about the evaluation? Could I put that
No,
in
if it's like coming up
just
later, that's
for-
fine. Please.
Just for now. Yeah, and hopefully as we talk through the evaluation process, we'll be able to get to that. We will get to that. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the RFP development. So it's approximately 90% complete. Included in there is a scope statement, scope of work, the technical specifications. So those technical specifications, as I mentioned, are written to reflect the design study decision set that we reviewed in December, which are in line with the district's priorities. There's obviously some legal requirements for executing a contract. There's proposal requirements. And so here, as we were discussing, there'd be mandatory elements. We obviously need a proposal that includes AMI needed in installation, as well as some alternatives that for various elements. And there'll be an allowance for optional elements. So there are AMI technologies outside of the four corners of what we're procuring, that this will give them the vehicle to be able to submit pricing on that equipment or process. And then there's the evaluation process, so we'll be upfront. Obviously, our aim, of course, and always, is to provide a fair and competitive procurement process. So the evaluation process will be disclosed, and then there'll be sample contracts that we'll provide. And I expect there may be some negotiation around the language in those sample contracts. Great. And so I just want to take a moment to compare and contrast the RFP that we're developing versus our regular project that we deploy. So what we're developing is a draft scope of work. So for instance, with the plain vanilla pipeline project, we designed the entire system. We designed the pipeline, the pipe size, the wall thickness, the alignment, the trench details. We tell the contractor exactly how to build it, and they give us the best price to build it. Here, we're asking for features and functionality. So we've written a draft scope of work that explains how the AMI system should work, how the value it should provide the district. I guess the comparison there would be if we told a pipeline contractor we want water from point A to point B, and that's the functionality we want. That would be the equivalent to what we're developing as our set of specifications, our scope of work under this project. We know the functionality, but we want to keep that bid pool nice and open and competitive so that a fixed network and a cellular network can compete for the project. And ultimately, we'll have the ability to choose the best technology or the best solution really for the district. So in doing so, there's, in writing specifications, there's a slight nuance. There are minimum requirements. So there are minimum requirements, there are shoulds and shall. As opposed to that pipeline project, we would dictate to the contractor, you have to do exactly this. We want 10 widgets, and we want them put there. Here, we would be saying, for instance, with the meter reads, we would be saying minimum requirement, the reading data has to be encrypted. If you can't encrypt the data, you're out. You can't bid. And then we would say you shall be able to provide hourly read data. But, and so that's a hard specification. That's sort of setting what we expect your proposal to include. But you certainly get marked down if you can't do that. But if you could, so if we would say you should be able to provide 15-minute data, you would get basically bonus points in your technical evaluation for if you could meet that higher bar. So that's just to give a flavor of how the specifications are written.
If I could time briefly on that. There are systems out there which can generate the information in 15-minute data.
Right.
But the batteries have to be recharged yearly, or they're put on a low-voltage power source. Low-voltage power source also enables remote cutoff, which hopefully is one of the issues we'll be able to check boxes to be checked. But it comes to the ability to have an alternate power source at the meter. And so I'm not certain that the technology is there to support a 15-minute read or anything other than a periodic read, possibly only daily, if we're going to get the 20-year battery life.
Director Weed, that's true on some meters, but from my understanding, a lot of the newer ones have like a lithium battery, and it's replaced every 8 years or something like that.
Let me comment. A radio transmitter does two things. It communicates to the water meter, and it transmits the readings out. So the example that Ben gave was that radio transmitter can read the meter every hour. Some can read it every 15 minutes. The reality is, those radio transmitters have a 20-year life. They're a lithium battery, and they've done the testing to make sure that the functionality that we're asking for lasts the full 20 years. So we're not looking at alternative power sources. We're definitely not looking at a battery replacement. If you have to replace the product, you're replacing the entire product, and we're expecting that to happen at the end of the 20 years. So the reality of the frequency of reading the meter doesn't take a lot of battery power. Transmitting the readings takes battery power. So when there's many products, some of them do 15-minute, but they also do hourly. Depending on the product, it may impact the battery, but usually it doesn't. But at a minimum, we would need hourly data, which will give you a full 20-year life on that product.
Okay.
Well, I guess just to provide some distance between the three, I guess, specification writing alternatives. A minimum requirement would disqualify the bid. So if we said in the bid you have to do 15-minute data, the bid pool would shrink down to the one or two vendors that can actually do that. Hourly data will be able to support all our business drivers and our business goals of the project. So that's why we're saying that's a shall. So we definitely need that as a minimum. But if you can't do that, or if you can't do encryption, we don't want a system that's not encrypted. We want to protect the privacy and security of the district's data. That would be an issue. But it certainly would be, we're not going to say no to 15-minute data.
Can I ask
An enhanced feature, I guess.
the board president, this is your prerogative here, but I'm going to suggest that we skip over the proposed requirements because this is redundant to prior presentations. And it's just 5 slides and then go immediately into section 2, which is evaluation criteria, and that would save us some time.
So if I could get a side briefing on this. I'm learning as we go along. But go ahead. You're running the meeting.
I'm welcome to do that if there's a comment. Director, you want to discuss one of these? Or?
The main thing on these slides that maybe we could just summarize in one fell swoop, but we wanted to ensure that the board is aware of all of what will be required to be submitted in these proposals. It's comprehensive. There's a great deal of information that's coming that will all be evaluated in accordance with the process that we'll talk about next. But we wanted to ensure that you understood that we weren't just saying, hey, make us your best sort of business case, tell us what's great about your product. We're requiring that they go into a great deal of detail and submit very specific information that addresses all of these areas. And all of these areas will be evaluated carefully by the project team.
Well, I think what you're saying is illustrated by one of your subsequent slides, where you have the questions that are down there very specifically in the weighting. And so I think that gives us a very clear idea of the depth that you're going in.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. That was certainly the objective of those two, as well as to, I guess, set up Joel's discussion on the next piece, the next topic, that there will be 2 volumes in the proposal. Volume 1 technical proposal and a volume 2 financial proposal.
So just one really quick comment on the other slide. Just remember that minimum requirement and shells tend to be the same. Right. So when you're putting things into bucket, right, usually you say, in our contract, thou shall at minimum perform to this standard.
Right.
So that's it.
Yeah. Good point. Good point. Great. So on that note, that would take me to questions. We covered a lot of ground.
One more technical question.
Very quickly.
I mean, one of the problems San Francisco ran into, they tried to do the data collection themselves and quickly realized they did not have the ability to support this new system. Will that be one of the elements we'll be looking at as to, do we go into a cloud with unlimited, potentially unlimited capacity, or how we are going to manage the data?
The
Or
hosting,
hold the data.
right? Yeah, the hosting of the IT support system for the AMI system. Yeah, it's certainly something will be evaluated and will be identified in their proposals. Absolutely.
I think we need to keep in mind as a board that what staff is proposing is actually very open-ended in a very strange sense, that we establish minimum criteria. We are actually not saying thou shalt be on the cloud or you should be A or B. We just say you have to meet these criteria. Now, one of the criteria will be our ability to maintain and use the data. So I think let them proceed. They actually left the door open enough to cover that type of uncertainties and contingencies.
And I would note that the type of data being collected, particularly on the more advanced meters, will expand dramatically: temperature, pressure, even water quality. So that will, it's kind of coming down the road.
Right. Yeah. Okay. On that note, I'll hand it over to Joel.
Great. Thanks. So let me just throw back into this minimum requirement.
First of all, I got to understand, are you rooting for Toronto or...
So I left my Raptors.
You're closer up.
I left my Raptors the tie in my hotel room because I wanted to try and buy some favor, but I'm not sure if that's going to help. Yeah, so go Raptors. We'll. It's a good way to kick off the this meeting, and then you can open up questions, I'm sure. So on the minimum requirements versus shalls and shoulds, in normal procurements, you're 100% right. If it says shall, you have to do it. We're treating this a little bit different, where there'll be few minimum requirements. Basically, like Ben said, there'll be, we want encryption. If your system can't do encryption, you're not going to propose. But the way we're going to treat shalls is, this is what we want. If you can't do it, you're allowed to provide an alternative. The reason why we do it, and then if it's a should, which is, the evaluation team decided it's a little bit open. We don't, we're okay if you do it or you don't, but it's sort of alluding to preference. The reason why we do it this way is, so basically we don't want to be able to negotiate every single thing. There's 475 shalls in a document. There's over 200 shoulds. So what it allows us to do is go to a vendor and say, so you bid on this document, which shalls do you want to discuss? It's 470. If you didn't talk about them in your proposal, then it's a shall. And then when we move to a contract and you sign a contract, no longer do you say, this document said should. No, we said shall. So you have to now do what we've asked you to do, unless we negotiated something different. So it's a better way of going. It positions the district to negotiate a very good contract, because what we don't want to do is blow up our RFP and take the vendor's statement of work, which is very vendor-centric. So that's why we do it that way. So it's a little bit different.
It is. It gives you, I guess, more room to negotiate.
It does.
In a sense.
It eliminates some of the things that we know you need to do to be successful.
Right.
Maybe it's a report given on a daily basis. Maybe it's some data that gets sent on a weekly basis. It eliminates some of those small things that we know you got to do in order to be successful.
Right.
And then it only makes them focus on, well, our system can't do it this way, but we can do it that way. Okay, then let's write this one specific section to meet your needs, or to meet the needs of the way they want to do it. So it's a different approach, but it's a very successful approach. It positions the district really well in the negotiations, because they always want to come in and they say, "I'm going to throw it out." No, we're not throwing it out. We'll discuss some shalls, but ultimately this is going to become the contract. Does that?
Yeah, it does. No, I'm just trying to wait to see. Usually we use shall as in something that the district or a party like me working on my own contract that I absolutely want.
Yes.
But in this case, you're using it as, well, we sort of absolutely need, but if you come up with something better, we could talk about it.
Correct.
That is an interesting spin to it.
Correct. So now we'll talk about the evaluation criteria. So the evaluation criteria that we've developed is ultimately based on the needs assessment. So we've gone through, extensive needs assessment. We've identified AMI business drivers, and those business drivers are attached to specifications and preferences. So we've designed this evaluation criteria to meet those specifications and preferences. As well, this isn't the first time this process has been designed. We've run this type of evaluation criteria on probably more than 10 to 15 different procurements. So we know what the market's reaction to this type of procurement is, and we know it will lead to a successful final contract. So I'm going to focus on the evaluation criteria, although some of the tasks I talk about may affect the solicitation process, the proposal evaluation, and the negotiation. So ultimately that evaluation criteria that we developed is really going to help or hinder the proposal evaluation. So when you're getting into it and you're saying, all right, now we've got these very large documents, how are we going to assess it? So we know that that's a challenge, and the process that we put in place, we're asking a whole bunch of questions up front in a very structured way to allow the evaluators to evaluate those proposals. So what the evaluation team decided was we would be doing a price per technical point evaluation. So what this does is this allows you to understand what the cost of the solution is based on the functionality the solution is going to provide you. So it's a simple calculation. You're still looking for the lowest cost per technical point, although you don't necessarily have to award or go forward with a proposal with the lowest cost. So it allows you to understand, that solution that has more functionality potentially would be cost more, and it still allows you to go ahead with that type of solution. There's a couple key components of our RFP. The first one is a volume 1. It's our technical proposal. So that's where the lion's share, that's where we'll probably kill a lot of trees, because that's where the lion's share of the document's going to be. There's going to be an extensive, hopefully around 200 or 300 page response to the questions that we've asked. So that's what's really going to take the vendors a lot of time in coming up with, they'll spend that 8 weeks during the solicitation developing this document. And this is how we're going to assess the functionality of the overall system. And we're going to do this in isolation. We're not going to look at price. Volume 2 is the financial. So the financial, we have developed an extensive price schedule that allows us to understand the capital costs as well as the operational costs. And some of the other benefits that we might want to incorporate into a net present value type calculation. So, for example, ultrasonics may have some long-term financial benefits associated with revenue improvements. So we're going to allow for some of those, we're going to allow for both, an understanding of the cost and an understanding of some of the financial benefits within that price schedule. Those two things will be combined to give us that price per technical point. And I'll get into exactly how that looks in a minute. Our RFP provides some assurances to the district. First, from a quality perspective, we know what the market is capable of doing in all elements of the RFP. So we've built some very strong specifications with a lot of shalls, so that if a solution passes what we're calling a minimum technical score, we know that on the whole, the solution is going to be able to achieve the majority of the benefits and business drivers that were identified in that needs assessment. So to get past that technical score, the vendor really is going to have to spend a lot of time showing us exactly how they're going to meet that and how they achieve the needs that were identified in the needs assessment. 2, financial. It's not just a capital cost you're making. It's a capital cost and life cycle cost. So for some solutions, the capital cost might be a little less, but there's a lot more ongoing annual costs. You want to make sure you're able to compare that type of solution with a solution that may cost more up front but have much lower operational costs later on. So what we do is we incorporate, the price schedule has both capital cost tables and long-term cost tables. So you really truly understand the overall cost over that 20-year life of the system. As well, we're going to allow some flexibility. So as Ben has alluded to, we're going to allow some alternatives. So if you remember back that triangle diagram, so you've got your meters, you got your AMI technology, and you've got your install. What we're considering an alternative is one of those boxes, one of those corners. We're going to allow vendors to submit positive displacement as well as ultrasonic within the same bid, so that you guys can properly evaluate different alternatives and potentially make a choice within that bid on which one you prefer. And that could be the same as an installer. That could be the same as an AMI technology. Many of the manufacturers have numerous technologies. Some of them have both cell technology and a standalone RF technology. So it'll allow those types of alternatives to be evaluated and submitted in a single bid. It'll also allow for some value-added options. So we're calling these optional items. And the best example would be remote shutoff or pressure, like you were saying. Certain manufacturers have these abilities. Certain ones don't right now. These are some of the outlying development products that are still being developed by some manufacturers. Some are able to do it right now. So these types of options wouldn't be evaluated, but they would be. We would encourage them, and would be able to move ahead with these types of products if they were a part of the the prime bid that we're looking for.
Let me ask a question on the financial side.
Sure.
So Director Huang and I were all of us were at Aqua earlier in May
Okay.
down in Monterey. And one of the sessions we sat in was on PPAs, for public-private partnership agreements. And so are we specifying in our RFP that we are looking for PPP or PPA type agreement? And also in that session, it became vividly clear that there are many different types of agreements that you can enter into. So I would expect that we're going to need your guidance on evaluating those, because they're not apple to apple.
Yeah, for sure. So typically this industry doesn't do this portion doesn't do a lot of PPA. So typically you're looking at a contractor, owner, contractor type arrangement. That's typical, and the RFP is pretty much structured that way because that's the way this industry currently really operates. There have been some that do performance contracting. The reality of performance contracting is they're taking a risk for a significant profit. I always sort of in order for them to make money, they need to be smarter than you. And I'm pretty good at this type of industry, knowing what type of performance things are going to have.
I don't mean to cut you off.
No problem.
I'm trying to bring this to the surface here because we're evaluating going with some clean energy alternatives too, where it might make sense to go with a PPA type agreement.
Sure.
But I want to have it out in our public forum here that we're looking at spending our own money or financing it in some way.
Sure.
Somewhere between $28 to $35 million. And so this is an actual district investment that we're making, where we have to show the ROI over, the lifespan of the product.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think so. Within the December workshop and in some of the earlier workshops we've done, we've touched on the business case, and those business case models showed payback, showed a positive ROI, and I think those are the types of things as we move forward into final negotiation and award with a vendor, we need to revisit, right? We need to make sure we take the numbers, the real numbers that we've got from the market, and put those back in to make sure that we're still aligned with what we've done so far.
So let me ask two follow-up questions. One is, when we put out the RFP, what are we doing to make sure that it has maximum visibility out in the marketplace? I'm actually not really quite that familiar with how we put these things on the street. And number two, I would assume you have some idea as to how the size of this opportunity might be perceived by potential vendors that are out there?
Yep.
Yeah, and where would you rank that? So those are two questions.
So on the size, this is probably a middle-of-the-road, medium-sized type opportunity. There's some 300, 400, 500,000 point projects that are in play currently in the U.S. That are considered large. So this is probably industry-wide a good middle-sized project. On the first question, which is how do we make sure that we have as many bidders as possible? It's about vendor engagement. So Ben has been fielding phone calls from all of the vendors. So even to the point of last year when we were in Las Vegas, Ben was there, I was there. We engaged with all of the vendors, making sure they know this is a sizable project. We want as many bidders as possible, and we want to engage you. So that's the key piece of making sure that we have as many people at the table as possible. Some of the requirements, when you start to combine them into the 3 elements, we're probably expecting 3 to 5 bidders to be really interested in this project.
What kind of trade show was that you were?
Yeah, we went to San Vegas. We were at the AWWA ACE conference. So ACE was in Las Vegas last year. But we've certainly done some outreach to the various vendors, meter vendors, AMI vendors, and installation vendors. And then Mark did some further outreach to basically just to ensure that there are combined entities that have executed this style of contract and are interested in this opportunity. So, while this is the best strategy for the district, this approach for the AMI deployment contract, combining all 3, we certainly want to make sure that there's a bid pool out there, a competitive bid pool interested in that. And so that was something we did during phase 1.
Without mentioning specific vendors, what is the reception to this kind of opportunity?
I get a lot of phone calls and emails, sales calls, right, and so, I guess I'll leave it there, but there's certainly interest in the project, a lot of interest.
Yeah, things
all the main vendors are looking for this.
Like we reached out to the meter vendors and got some samples for some of their ultrasonics. So Robert did some testing on some of the newer technology. So that sort of gives a market cue that you're interested in new technology. So we've done a lot of those things that would show the market that A, there's interest in the technology, B, that they're serious about the project, and we'll continue. So as the RFP is about to be released, we'll do another reach out to them.
So I do have a question on this slide.
Sure.
Just to pull it back. So where does experience come in one of your scoring evaluations?
I'll show you a little later.
Okay, because installation, when we come to the installation
Yeah, for
component,
sure.
experience is really important to us.
Yeah, for sure. So let's get to the next,
Okay.
once we get into the details, then
That's
it'll
good.
show up.
All right.
Sorry.
Hold on, finish your comment.
No, that's fine.
Okay. Following up on the concept of the PPA, about 2 years ago, this board had a presentation from a AMI person who concentrated on discussing a fixed-base telecommunications system that would take care of it, with the implication that it would be in third-party ownership when they finished, that they could then, but using the water district to get it established,
Sure.
because we have certain rights. Would that be within? Would that type of an agreement be within the scope
Absolutely.
of this RFP?
Absolutely. So the way it's structured is it gives the vendors. So let's say it's a cellular. So a cellular solution currently does not need any infrastructure. It's already there. So the line items associated with the data collectors and some of the installation would be blank. And then there would be an annual fee based on the number of endpoints that they deploy. That annual fee, they would just bill that number in. So that solution where there's no upfront cost definitely is able to happen. The other solution, which is, hey, the district's going to own the network. That's available. So they'll be able to put prices in for the data collector equipment, the installation. Once they're done, it's a district's asset, and they would be able to put in pricing for what we call NAS, network as a service, so that they would maintain that system. They could also say, well, hey, LoRa is another technology that may or may not be deployed in this area. So they may say, look, we want you guys to help us deploy the network, and then we'll reduce our ongoing cost for you guys to use that network because you're helping with some of the upfront costs. All of those options on the table. So the way the price per point example works, and this will get touched on again a little bit later, but you'll see in this situation we've got two proposers. One of them, proposer one, is technically a better solution for the district, so they've got 900 points. Their financial evaluation came in at $38 million for just the capital cost. Excuse me. So their price per point is $42,000. The proposer 2 was not as good. There was some elements that the evaluation team felt didn't meet their needs. So they only got 700 points, but it was acceptable. They were a lower cost solution at $36 million. But when you do the math, because of the additional functionality you're getting out of proposer 1, you'll see that the price per point comes in at $51,000. So the best solution would be to go and negotiate with proposer 1, because they're going to get the most functionality for the best cost. So that's how this sort of works, and so it does allow for innovative solutions that may cost more, but overall, technically, is better. So then you would enter negotiations with that lowest price per technical point solution. So the technical evaluation, as you know, is complicated. There's a lot of different elements to it. So the way we tackle this is we've designed 3 different levels of evaluation. The first level really focuses on the corners of that triangle: AMI, meters, and install. The second level focuses on the subcomponents of each of those items. So for an AMI system, you've got a radio transmitter, you've got a network, and you've got a bunch of software. For an install, you've got the installation process, but you've also got a meter installation system, so a data management system that's going to get that data back. So all of these subcomponents can be evaluated and weighted in matter of importance. And then the last level is actually right down to the questions. So we've got about 150 questions that we're asking the vendor to respond to. So because there's so many elements to it, really we're not asking the evaluator to say, what's the best AMI solution? We're asking the evaluator to tell us, score each one of these questions. And if you score it according to the template we give you, it's going to roll up and provide you with the best overall solution. And this is where, are you going to get the best of all 3 elements? Maybe not, but you're going to get the best overall solution. And this is how we do it, so that it's not slanted. The evaluators are really focused on functional components of every element of the solution. So, what is those levels? So the first level, you'll see here is, we've got 4 different components to the first level. The first one is project overview. So the project overview typically are specifications and requirements that relate to all 3 elements. This project will not be successful if you just look at one piece of the pie. So there's a bunch of different elements within the project overview that affects all 3 components. So read success rate is a good example. So read success rate is, how many times have I heard that radio transmitter? Well, that only works if the radio transmitter is working, it's communicating to the network. The network is properly communicating to the software, and by the way, that install information has to properly make it. But if all of that works, but the water meter was faulty, or the wiring didn't work, and that radio is not sending numeric data, then it's not successful. So that's why we sort of grouped overview items like read success rate into its own category. So we've weighted that with 100 points out of 1,000. The next one is AMI system. Obviously, this is deemed the most important piece of it. So we put 350 technical points to it, and it's broken down. That level 2 breakdown includes radio transmitter, AMI network software, and then AMI software. So there's different elements to it. So to go back to the experience question, you'll see on level 2, within the AMI network, within the installation, within the water meter supply, you'll see the first element, subcomponent, is experience. So often with a consulting RFP, you would see experience, project team, methodology, and that's typically how this works. Well, because there's so many elements, you really have to evaluate that experience based on, the system, the meters, the installation. Yeah?
On a number of the AMI implementations that I've looked at, there are a handful. The district or the city decided to use their own labor to do the installations because they thought it was a cost saver over what was a bid on the project. What's your opinion and experience about that?
Couple things. I usually, it depends on the situation. Some unions, sometimes there's a strong union, and it makes sense to not disrupt the employee-employer type relationship, and the reason you would do it yourself is to continue to build that relationship. But purely from a cost perspective, typically the installation is a lot lower to do it by external services because they typically pay on a per piece basis, not hourly. So the installer has significant incentive to do many more a day. So your production per crew is often higher. The other reason it's a little better is if the contractor is running behind, you can get another contractor, or you can force them to grab more resources, and it's a lot quicker for them to get back on path. Whereas when employees are doing it, typically you have a staffing level that you maintain, and this type of project leads to that type of resource requirements. And often the timing to translate those resources into contracts and then get rid of them at the end of the project is often quite disruptive. But I've seen it done both ways. It can be done successfully both ways. The way that we propose to do it has been the most successful.
Okay, great.
There we go. So how do we have at the very, at level 3, how do we allow that each evaluator to evaluate a response? So what we do is we have a scoring metrics which allows them to score based on the expectations of the evaluator. So it's a 0, 2, 5, 7, 10 score with 10 exceeding expectations. So basically, the evaluator would go through, take a look at the response to the question that was asked, and then determine if it's meeting or exceeding or not hitting expectation. And that's how they score each individual score. So this is an example of one of our sheets. So this is just a small piece. Didn't think we wanted to go through 150 questions. So this is an example of the 3 levels and sort of how they roll up. So the example here, this is a little easier, is you'll see, question 1, business goals. This proponent met most of the expectation, but fell on some of them. Question 5, related to project organization. The team have felt that they exceeded expectation, they had a good team, and resumes supported that. So it's a 10. And what ends up happening is, so we've weighted level 1, we would weight level 2, and let's say there's one particular question, for example, experience, which is a response. Let's say that is deemed to be really, really important. we're able to weight one of these questions, so it, within this section, holds a much more, it would impact the score a lot more. So we're able to do that, and what that allows us to do is really narrow in on what's important to the district, and put the points where it's required. So, and of the 150 questions, in some of the proposals or some of the procurements we've done, there has been, the last one I did, there was 2 questions that were like 10% of the overall technical. So if they really scored well in those 2 questions, they would do well. The vendors don't know what our weightings are. They know what the level 1 weighting is, level 2 and level 3 weighting they don't know. So it really forces them to give a really good response to every single question. So who's doing the evaluation? So we built a project team right when we started this process, and it was a cross-functional project team. So we're continuing that trend, which is we need to have people from all the different parts, key parts of the organization to participate in the evaluation. So we've got someone from operation and maintenance, the meter reading and customer service, information technology, and water supply public outreach. Obviously, we've got our project manager, Ben, who would also be an evaluation. EMA typically facilitates. We don't evaluate. So we help with the facilitation process, but it's really up to that 5-team evaluation team to make the decision. So what happens is we're going to get multiple proposals. The evaluation team is going to review those individually, and then they are going to come up to a consensus score. So it'll be a single consensus score on which solution is the best solution to move forward. That recommended solution we would enter negotiations, and we would, assuming we come to a successful end of that negotiation, we would then come back to the board with our recommended approach, which would be a single vendor. Each member of the evaluation will review, complete an individual evaluation sheet, and that consensus score, basically that consensus looks like, we usually do a 2 or 3 day meeting with the team. We sort of put every individual score up, and then where there is differences, the evaluation team would then talk about why there's differences and then come to a single score. We've always been able to find sort of some consensus with most of these. So there is that minimum score threshold, and that's what's going to dictate a short list. So let's say we get 5 proposals up front. 2 of them we've deemed as non-acceptable through the evaluation. So 2 of them would not be considered further. 3 would move forward into a presentation. The presentation isn't being evaluated. What the presentation does is it's a demonstration and presentation of the project team. So it allows the evaluation to go back and say, did I properly evaluate the written word based on what they said or based on what they showed? And then you would adjust those scores accordingly, depending on which question that they demonstrated. So once those evaluations, the eligible solutions and presentations are done, they would be opening the financial proposal. So not until the evaluation team is satisfied with the solutions that were provided and presented, only those would have the financials open. We would identify that best value proposal and then move to negotiate to ensure that sort of the evaluation team's assessment of it is correct and they're able to get to some agreement. So, the example I would give is we talked about shoulds and shalls. Let's say we have the best solution and this vendor says, well, we want to negotiate every single shall. That may not be tenable. So that may be a situation where, we need to go to the second score evaluation team or proposal. The evaluation would then, it does include initial capital cost, life cycle cost, which is typically, so the capital cost is our CapEx, what we presented before. The operational costs are the OpEx, and then where there is some financial improvements due to enhanced technology, ultrasonics being more accurate over time, some of those things could be also incorporated. We wouldn't be putting the whole, we wouldn't be doing a business case for every scenario, but we would do an update of the business case based on the proposed, the best proposed solution. And then the award recommendation is based on that price per point, per technical point. The lowest price per technical point would be recommended. So this is sort of an example, it's a good diagram of all the different components and how they sort of come together. So we've developed that RFP. The RFP has a bunch of, 3 different specifications. Some of them are mandatory, shalls, some of them are shoulds. We have defined the evaluation criteria within that RFP, so the bidders know what they're how we're going to award points. And then there's the financial evaluation, which is the capital cost and the life cycle. Oops, I did it again. There we go. So this is sort of a more detailed example that I gave earlier, which is in Proposer 1, they exceed all of the elements and they get their 900 points. Proposer 2 met most of them, but was clearly not as good as Proposer 1. Based on the overall capital cost and life cycle cost, the price per point is that $42 or $42,000, and so that's who you would move ahead with.
For some reason, your slide is missing the extra $5 million.
Yeah, sorry, but I don't know if you click
In our own slides.
There it is.
There we go.
So sometimes we want it, sometimes we don't. So yeah, no, so that is sort of the presentation on how we would do the evaluation. So I assume there's no questions, right? So
we have a proof of concept validation phase in here.
yes, we do.
And will that be drafted into the contract and based on completion and acceptance of the evaluation, they make a decision to go ahead or not go ahead?
So the intent of the RFP is built assuming you're moving forward. The POC provides a way to validate that all of the metrics are being hit. If they weren't being hit, the POC gives an opportunity to get out of the contract so that you're not committed to the whole thing. So that's sort of how it works.
I'll keep this a very short story. About 10 years ago, this district brought in a fellow from East Bay Mud, put him on our staff. He had experience with AMI there. We did a pilot project. 400 of our neediest customers. A couple of years later, not a single of those customers wanted the information, and we had made a decision not to proceed beyond. I fear history may repeat itself, but my fear is we'll be locked into something if we do not have a decision that it's really not being locked into by the public.
Yeah, I don't know. So my only comment there is it's more than just data to the customer, right? So there's some supply elements where you need to better understand the consumption to better reduce some water loss. So it's more than just the customer service element. So
true, but the decision was made that there was no public acceptance to what we were trying to do. Now it's going to be a cost of at least $500 a meter for every one of our customers, and the percentage of people who will use it, if we're lucky, maybe 2%. So it's an expensive opposite. From the customer's viewpoint, it's a particularly expensive
yeah, I think New York So New York did theirs about 10 years ago, and over the last 10 years, they've had a customer portal. 40% of their customers signed up to that. So I think that people's expectations are changing, and I think that it's likely not only a technology thing, it's a public outreach thing. And if you do those two in combination, you'll have success for customer engagement.
And the prior presentation we had from the person who wanted to set up the fixed space system, use Long Beach. Long Beach, it turned out, we didn't mention in our presentation, is on a subscription basis. Their city is putting in a citywide Wi-Fi. And as an auxiliary benefit of a Wi-Fi, the Internet of Things, individual consumers could, if they wish, purchase at a very discounted cost a smart meter and read their water bill on their cell phone for water usage. They've had very poor subscription rates. So we'll see. I'm hopeful, but highly skeptical.
Great.
Mr. Shaver.
Yes, sir.
I'd like to bring up the two issues that I brought up with you and President Gunther, and also Mr. Stevenson. So I brought up two issues related to the process here, and I'd like to encourage conversation among the board members here. First, because this is one of the largest capital expenditures that the district will be making that I think any of us have encountered so far, I thought it might be helpful if there was a process for a little preview of at least the major AMI RFP to the board members before that hit the street. And Mr. Miyake was part of that same discussion on what the legal parameters might be for that. And I'm going to turn this over to Mr. Shaver. So I'm just trying to address the two questions I brought up. And the second is that in a number of your slides here, you're showing the team evaluating the different responses that have come in and then going over and then deciding on the vendor and going into contract negotiations. And from my observance of other public meetings where, you know, you're dealing with this sum of money, it may be helpful for the board to have a little bit of a chance to see in a legal way what those final choices are before we actually enter into contract negotiations. So I would look for the general manager or someone else to respond to.
So, what we discussed were two issues. One, would there be an opportunity for either directors or the full board to review the actual RFP and potentially opine on it prior to the district releasing it to the market. So that is possible to do. And I think what we could do is, well, first of all, I would prefer that if we do that, if one director wants to review it, all directors get that opportunity. And then the question becomes, okay, what happens if there is feedback, and then how do we deal with that? So one potential way is to have, to go through a process like this one. The RFP gets finalized to the point where EMA, General Counsel, and district staff is comfortable that it's near its final status, and that should happen hopefully in mid to late June. and the general manager issues one-way communication of the document to the board members, who then get a certain amount of time to review it and to provide feedback. And that feedback would have to come back to staff. And then the tricky part is, what do we do about that? So the board could authorize staff to just take that feedback into account and move forward without coming back to the full board. You took a similar approach on the logo, if you remember, on the logo design for this project, which was a very... There's the outcome. If anybody's really unhappy with it, maybe that would be an indication that that process isn't for you. If the feedback, though, was significant, the board could leave it up to the sort of the judgment of the general manager to schedule a workshop where we would go over that and resolve it. One thing that I heard this evening that makes this process interesting is that the proposal from EMA is to kind of have that weighting not made public, so that the market isn't able to sort of game their proposal. I'm not sure. I'd really like to hear the director's feelings about this, but I think reviewing the proposals without seeing that weighting might feel a little unfulfilling for certain directors, so I don't know how we would address that issue. So that's kind of step one in terms of, can we get through the RFP process in a way that allows the directors to provide, or at least to review it and perhaps provide some feedback before we go to the market and allow them to propose. The second part of it is, how does the board, or is the board interested in being part of the evaluation process itself? And that's probably a little more tricky to deal with than the first part. So what I'd like to kind of leave for your consideration is, let's see how we do on the RFP part, and then we'll see if we want to go to that second part. So here's an opportunity, and I would encourage you that you're not really talking to staff at this point. You're talking to each other to see what you feel comfortable with, because obviously once staff gets the direction from the board, we'll do our best to accommodate whatever it is that you feel most comfortable doing.
Okay.
So let me comment on why I made the request on at least being able to review the RFP. And as you know, I have some strong experience in technology and looking at these RFPs, or even having to work on drafting them up. So what I want reflected from this board out to our community is that we had a fair, open, and competitive bidding process. And I have seen in reviewing at least a limited number of AMI RFPs that are available just on the internet to look them up, that sometimes an RFP can be steered one way or the other. And I'm a little sensitive to that, and I'm not in any way insinuating that our staff would do anything like that for EMA. But all of us here on the board have a fiduciary duty back to our community. And so, as I mentioned to Mr. Shaver, Mr. Stevenson, I'm just looking for a soft comfort feel in going through a document. I'm not intending to nitpick here and there. That's not my job. I trust the staff as being experts on procurement and vetting the proper vendors, but I just want to have my own kind of assurance and comfort feel. That's all I'm looking for.
Okay, I'll start. So I'm a little bit torn, I'll be very honest, because philosophically speaking, we hired him to make sure he hired the correct people with the experience to carry out our very overall high-arching requirements. So philosophically, there is no reason for us to deep dive into that level to review RFP. But I also heard you about not write the RFP in a way that is purposely limit the pool of competition. I think that's what you were trying to get at.
Yeah, and let me just add to what you're saying. I did say in front of President Gunther, Mr. Shaver, that it's my nature in business not to micromanage things.
Right.
And I don't want to micromanage things. I said exactly your same language. We hire the general manager to hire our staff, do their job. And so I'm looking for really the highest level of comfort moving forward on such a big expenditure.
Right. So I guess what I'm going to push back is that is there any way, without looking at the RFP, to provide enough guidance and assurance that the contract will not be skewed in any way? I'm going to use the word skewed or favored. The reason for that is once we touch it opens up all sort of very interesting questions in terms of providing feedback, how we communicate that, and how that's going to be incorporated. That is an area that I deal with some contracts in my life that I am not quite comfortable because I actually have very strict guidance in my other side of my life when I deal with contracts, who I could talk to about the scoring team, how we score, and what we structure in an RFP, and who I can talk to. So I'm actually a little bit uncomfortable to actually touch that information. So I'm going to ask general manager and council, is there any way that we could provide stopping points and preference that to assure that this contract will not be written in a way that's preferential to anybody? And let's be very honest. And this is not going to sound that great, sorry, Mr. General Manager, but if staff has the intention to skew the contract in any way, regardless what we looked at, it's going to be written that way. And I actually have faith in this team that they will do their very best to have a fair contract. So now that will get us to the point that how do we convey that information to our customers, saying that we, the five of us, did our job to make sure that this RFP went out with the best intention and has the best term for our customers. And that is the question where I am not quite sure where we need to end up, because touching that information really scares me. It does have other legal implications that I just rather not deal with on a personal level. And I do totally understand what you're saying. And I do share that in terms that we do need to provide that sense of comfort to our customers, because this is a very large contract.
Well, our EMA guests here are not quite as aware of what's going on around in the public area, the public arena, but, you know, just our neighboring community, Milpitas, we've had our third city manager in 2 years. And one of them was removed for steering contracts toward certain developers and things like that in the community. It's been kind of topsy-turvy, and it's been going on in some other communities. I'm trying to safeguard our board from any impression that it's not, like I said, fair, open, competitive. That's all I'm looking for. That's the bottom line. Absolutely. And that no one can insinuate anything toward our district. Because people can come back later on, they say, you spent $30 million or $35 million. You're out of your mind. And they'll go check out the vendor and everything else, you know. So you never know what's going to crop up down the road.
Go ahead.
First, you know, we're a policy-making board, and it's so easy to get into the details and try to drive a procurement. At a committee level, maybe we could take a look at some of the process. I don't know that it has to come. Certainly would not have the full board. It has more exposure and not be. And there may well be a role at a committee one of the committees having a review of the process, some of the details. I am concerned, and I repeated it before, and I'll try to not rehash it, the same idea, but here we go again. We require meters in the Delta. Why, I don't know, but that became the cost lab, and we put meters in whether the meters are not in the Delta. And people are being charged $800 to $1,000 to have a meter in their home, when the district didn't need it, it was mandated by the state. We have no conservation or other outside pressures to do this as a district. It is easier for our staff not to have to read meters on a frequent basis. Release it, we could do it automatically, but we could get the same cost savings by decoupling our meter reading from our billing and read the meters every 4 months and bill monthly. So it's not a cost saving issue. Why we're doing this is still somewhat bewildering to me. There are some qualitative issues, though, such as the accuracy of the meter. Positive displacement meters only read down to about ½ a gallon per minute, where the other technologies go down to a small fraction of that. The ability of telling the consumer that we can measure a leak, which you can with the ultrasonic or other pulse technologies, which you cannot necessarily do it with the, at least quantitatively. You can detect that there's a water flow, but you don't know how much. So those are just issues of qualitative nature that may or may not make it into the final process. But they are important to the customer when they call up and say, well, yeah, what we're providing. To date, we've not been able to make a sale to a single customer that this type of information is important to them. We don't think, from our prior experience. So we're charging ahead. We have a chance to review it again at the issue of the contract, and I would encourage us at the point of proof of concept validation that we have another checkpoint as well.
On that happy note, I think President Gunther might have some ideas that would address my concerns without potentially touching the RFP.
I think, I don't want to speak for the general manager, but that issue kind of came up. I believe the concept of we can propose, if we have an issue, if we have concept problems. I personally have a very strong feeling. We've workshopped this, we've talked about it. Staff's going to hit this pretty close. Obviously, there's some differing opinions on whether we should be moving forward, or those have been expressed multiple times. But I'm comfortable with the general manager saying, okay, here it is. You have comments. And taking a look at our comments and deciding whether or not we need to incorporate them, or perhaps put the project on hold and workshop it, address it. We'll have to do that in public. That will be a public meeting. It would have to be a workshop, most likely. Could be a board meeting. I kind of doubt it, but it could be. But they should be able to incorporate. I don't expect a lot of comments. I think a lot of the comments that have already been raised are already there. Are already in the proposal. And some of them are probably more in-depth than what the proposal is even going to be. And we're not going to know what that is until we get the RFP back. So that was proposed, I think I'm speaking correctly, right? So that's what I'd like to go ahead with. I think that'll work. We'll have the opportunity, take a look at it. We already kind of know what's going to be in it. If there really appears to be a roadblock, we could throw a roadblock up and say, okay, we need to, wait, we need to talk about this. As far as the contract award, we haven't really talked about that much. But my view on that is that we need to do that in a separate meeting. That will allow us an opportunity to review the staff recommendation, if we get to that point. I'm expecting us to get to that point. An in-depth look before we say go. And there again, if we have a problem, we could back away and say we have a problem here. I don't expect to see a problem where we will not be able to get consensus to move forward.
So I'm just going to say sure in terms of looking at it, provided that we could keep it in the cone of silence, because what you're going to touch is unfair competitive advantage
Well,
if this information is out there.
This information will have to be retained as confidential.
In terms of the evaluation before the contract is awarded, be very careful, because there's a reason there's a point system, because that system is supposed to be
We're not
cut and
involved.
dry. When it comes to us, we're political. That does
No,
be very
but that's
fair.
not part of
So
it. We will not be part of the, I don't believe we discussed.
then there's no
being
reason for
involved.
us to look at it before war.
Yeah,
There shouldn't.
if the board has interest, or any members of the board, in somehow being involved in the evaluation of proposals itself, that is complicated.
That would be-
And we
Yeah.
would want an
We're not
opportunity
going there.
to come
No.
up with a
I
process.
already, well, that wasn't what you were
No,
proposing.
that
anyway.
totally wasn't what
No.
Paul was
Yeah.
suggesting. I was just a little bit concerned when you start saying that we will have opportunity to take a look before you would award it. That should be
No,
something.
let me rephrase. No, what my rephrasing is that a lot of times we get a contract, we have all of maybe 20 minutes to discuss it.
Right.
My suggestion is, when we're that level, when they're proposing the award, we do it in a separate meeting,
Okay.
where we have that opportunity. We have plenty of time to set this thing up. We made a decision a long time ago to go to one board meeting a month if we have additional issues. That gives us that board meeting to really say, okay, here we are, we're going to do this, this is why we're doing it, this is how we're doing it, and if we get 3 votes, it gets awarded.
Okay, that would be a
Let
yes or
me-
no. Okay.
Allow me to explain what was behind my thinking here. It was looking at other districts and communities that went through the same process. I'm just going to pull up City of Santa Barbara as one example, because I think it closely matches what we're doing. They hired an outside consulting firm, much like EMA, and they went through a bidding process. They ended up with 5 bids coming back in. The consulting firm narrowed it down to 2 options. One was fixed, one was cellular, and then it was brought before the city council to make a decision. And what city council was evaluating were risks. They were evaluating longevity of product in the field, technology transitioning over time, all kinds of intangible issues. And I brought this forward to Mr. Shaver, President Gunther, because at the end of the day, I think that we're going to come down to some choices on intangibles here, and risk. Do we want to go with newer technology, versus more stable technology? Are we willing to do those things? Those are choices. Maybe the way of satisfying, as I'm thinking out loud here, is when you go through your evaluation and you're scoring things, maybe one of those things is a risk evaluation,
Then is the longevity and system life cycle or lifetime part of your evaluation?
It's certainly a component, but it would be true to say that we've combined all 3 elements, so there will be compromise
Right.
somewhere along the way. we're going to get the best overall solution, for all three components to move the project forward to meet the goals of the project. What we haven't done is gone out to look for the best-in-breed AMI system, best-in-breed meters, and best-in-breed installers, because that would put the district in a lot of what we perceive to be a lot of risk. In that the district is in the middle, we've paid for all these things, and there's no guarantee that it'll work. We're looking for a single entity to provide the best overall solution, and we've baked in a number of alternatives so that we can have that flexibility to select the best system.
So, say the evaluation team completes their evaluation. We end up with the overall highest scoring proposal. That comes to the board for approval. Does the board at that time get an opportunity to opine on some of the optional elements? I mean, there'll be a staff recommendation on some of these, but say, for example, ultrasonic meters is an optional element. Will they have an opportunity at that time to basically say, yeah, we see that it costs this much more to do that, but for these reasons, we see that it meets all the district's business needs. We want to go ahead. Is that what is envisioned at that time?
That's the perfect example that I was looking at,
It's certainly my goal to bring a recommendation to the board. So, and we will identify through this process the best value proposal. But that proposal will have alternatives. So I think saying yes to
I think that's a good answer.
So we are asking for proposers to give us sort of options, right, in their bid. So if, say it's as an example, if it's an AMI provider that provides both positive displacement meters or ultrasonic meters, we're asking for both, right? Give us a bid on your ultrasonic, give us a bid on your positive displacement, and even give us a third option, which is like a hybrid between the two potentially, right? So that maybe there's an opportunity for us to kind of evaluate both the ultrasonic technology. But that would be within one bid, right? One proposal, sort of multiple tracks that we could potentially go down.
So I think the question is, say the board members get an opportunity to review the RFPs, and say there are some of these optional elements.
Right.
Some of them aren't. I mean, a proposer is going to have a package that's going to meet all of our base needs, and there's different technologies to do that, but those technologies are sort of internal to the entity proposing, so one of them could be cell-based, one of them could be... So we're not talking about, at this point, evaluating sort of the base proposals. It's kind of like the extra value items.
Right.
Like we used ultrasonic meters. It could be some enhancement or some functionality that increases customer service. One entity that has a cost associated with it. That would be an optional.
Right, and that was the point that I was making, was that we were not planning on bringing back to the board multiple proposals, but rather a proposal.
Which will have some, do you want the leather interior? That's possible. Do you want the xenon headlights? Do you want the higher performance turbo?
Yeah, so let me ask this question, because I can go either way. It's really a question for the board. Because I've looked at a number of these different AMI implementations, some have been made internally by the staff or the Public Works Department, and then comes forward as a recommendation as to who we're going to negotiate with. In other cases, it's come before the full City Council with all the proposals, narrowed down to 2, but you see the other 3 that are there. and there is a city council or board level discussion on which selection of vendor, then staff is instructed to go and negotiate. So it does happen both ways. It's what's the preference of this board?
So Ben, I do have a question on your scoring system. So that means the options are not scored, right? Or are you planning to score the options also?
Right, there'll be some options that will not be scored, but so outside of what's requested. But then there'll be alternatives within the bid that we have to do.
You know, just speaking for myself, and I know I raised two questions to the senior staff here, but as long as I had a comfort feel that we have a fair, open, competitive process on the RFP, I'm willing to trust in the staff later on, you know, to come with a recommendation out of the scoring system and all that. But I think you should hear from board members as to, you know, what's our intuition on perhaps going with older versus newer technology, positive displacement versus, you know, other solutions that are out there.
So I think ironically, the way this RFP is going to work out is going to actually be so wide that it's going to be hard to skew it towards any particular vendor or field, just because our bookends are so wide. So in that sense, looking at this RFP, I am not that concerned that staff is heading in with particular vendor. Okay, so I'm fine with that just because the way the scope is. I guess the question comes to options, because you understand the five of us have very strong feelings on certain options.
Right.
If you're only planning to present to us the highest scoring package, they may or may not have the option that we want, because what you're recommending is the best compromise. So I want to make sure that we understand that the option that we're looking for might not come back just because the package.
That's very observed. So there's some manufacturers that make an AMI system and a meter, and they only make an ultrasonic meter. They're not going to give you a proposal with options that include a PD meter. There are some that have both. So those proposals will have that option. There will be a best value thread through that proposal that staff will identify. And then there'll be value added that the applicant will exercise.
I think we don't want to lose sight of the fact of it. At any point, when the proposal is open, after it's been negotiated, and is presented to us, if we don't like what we see, we just have to say no. 3 board members say no, we want it, then you need to talk to, you know, contractor 2. It's that. We always have that option. It's just, this is a big contract. But, I mean, realistically, we always have the option, whenever anything comes before us, to say, you know what, we think you need to look at that again. Now, obviously, saying no would be, at the end of this would be, whoa,
Painful,
but I don't expect to do that. But if something was out there and it was a real sore thumb, we have that option.
I guess what I'm trying to get at is, if ultrasonic meter is a must, then we should ask them to write it in as thou shalt have an option to provide ultrasonic meter. Right, so I guess what I'm trying to tease out before we get to the RFP part is, if there are bits and pieces that any one of us feel very strongly that we want to come back to us as an option, then we should speak now.
But I don't want to speak for Ed, but if I remember correctly, one of the concepts is, if they're going to be proposing a meter type, there's a reason why. Is that am I kind of going correctly? If there's a new ultrasonic technology, this is why we want to go this direction, so we know.
That's right. I mean, we left the RFP open to the market to give us the best combinations of solutions that they could muster that will meet our business drivers. So that's been the
our marching orders from the board, as we understood it as staff, is kind of like best overall business case. So, from a sort of just make the process as painless as possible perspective, from staff's perspective, if you told us it has to be ultrasonic meters, it has to be a particular type of technology, whatever, that makes it very easy for us to go to the market. But what we've been trying to do is be flexible enough, because the board, as we were hearing it, expressed strong interest in also wanting to know the cost.
Right, so let me take it back. I totally agree with our approach. I've been going along with all these workshops. I just want to make sure that people on this side of the board table understands that not all our wish list will come back to us. So I just wanted to make that really clear, because I don't want to get to a board meeting and we get to a point where one of us say, hey, I'm not going to go with this because the option I want is not here. So I just want to be very clear.
Well, once again, if three say yes,
Yep.
then the contract is.
I want to emphasize I'm open-minded on the technologies here. But one thing I would like to ask for, Director Huang's reminding me of it, is I've heard the stories about when we've done things like a TP1 and it didn't work out because we were trying new technology. And I understand the risks of going to new technology too. But I've spent my life working in new technology. And one of the things that I think could help assure our staff, our operations, folks and everyone else, board, is there has to be some kind of data behind all of these new ultrasonic meters. I've had to do, all the temperature, shake, rattle, and roll on products, and failure rate analysis and testing, so that you have some documentation to show your customers on what they can expect out of the life of that product. And it would be reassuring, I think, to ask the vendors if they can supply that product information. I know it's got to be there.
Well, one key stat on anything is installed history for us, right? Because what we're talking about is equipment out there in the wild, dealing with whatever, that some of that is difficult to recreate in a lab. And the other thing is we own it for the whole period of time. So we take on all the risk. It's not like you sell it to a customer after you assure them. So that's just...
Well, I would just counter by saying I have experience with rugged industrial products too, which have to meet a totally different specification from standard commercial off the shelf. I've dealt with mil-spec products, they have to survive, the harshest of circumstances out in the field. There's got to be some data on these products, and it would be nice to see what it is. It's never been presented at any conferences.
We can have them provide supporting data in their proposals, whether it's installed history, whether they have some other kind of information. But I still want to get back to the fundamental issue that we're talking about here. What do we want to do before we issue the proposals, the RFPs to the market? And then to what extent does the board want to be part of the evaluation process? So I think I have an approach in my mind on what we do pre-RFP. We expect that we'll have that ready to go more or less in mid-late June. We have a board meeting scheduled in July. So I would suggest that we put that item on that board meeting agenda in July, so you'll have at least a couple of weeks to review the proposal and provide feedback to me before the board meeting, and then we can have a discussion if needed to clarify anything. And then, so it's almost like we don't normally do this because you've empowered staff to issue RFPs without board approval, but we could put on the agenda an item that that allows the board to authorize the general manager to issue the RFP. So you then control that. So if the majority of the board feels fine with that, then off we go. I still don't have a feel, though, so that's what I think I'm proposing for the RFP process. It might slow us down a couple of weeks, but in the big scheme of things, maybe that's okay.
I feel comfortable.
Okay. 2? I count 4. Okay. Now the bigger, trickier issue, and it's a little related to the RFP, is because if there's going to be some sort of board evaluation part of the proposals, which again has difficult details that we would have to sort out as staff. Like, for example, frequently in these proposals there's confidential information, proprietary information, so we'd have to kind of figure out, if you're going to evaluate them in a public forum, how do you deal with that? EMA probably has some experience with it, I know council does. And then how do you feel about being part of that process? You have not done that before in my tenure here. So I think that's what we need to
How
kind
about
of
if we
figure
just
out.
postpone having a discussion on that for right now?
Well, the problem is, if there's going to be a board evaluation component to the proposals themselves, we may have to include something in the RFP itself.
I suggest we don't do it.
I
I believe that we've given the staff our expectations, particularly about the reliability of the product in multiple levels. And if you looked in the one chart, it kind of showed that every single, in fact, I can't find it, but every single step or section had that in it. Something I can't find. But anyway,
It's okay.
yeah, I think we've identified it in every single section.
I'm fine with her.
That one, let me step in and take a very position. I think we're the governing board. I can't think of any other contract that has more impact on the individuals and our constituents. And so at least having some say in the final evaluation of before we make the final proposal, not to accept the document presented to us by staff as being the best at this time, that we need to have a final say that is involved in that final evaluation.
I disagree.
So
I think
let me
we have
just make
that.
sure it's clear what you're disagreeing on.
Oh, man.
So the board would still retain the authority to approve the final agreement.
Right.
It's just that what we're talking about here is the evaluation of the proposals.
And we could also, I believe...
So
ask
you
that
could
it
have
be-
a no-go at that time.
Or ask that it be resubmitted for additional modification of the proposal.
That's correct. We
They propose.
always have that option.
Well, as long as that's understood, that we're not
I mean, that's-
accepting what the proposal...
No, that's always on the table.
Okay. Look, comment on meters, because we talked about positive displacement. You lose 5 to 8% of revenue with positive displacement meters. That's a significant factor, and hopefully there'll be something in your evaluations. Also, the performance deteriorates over time with positive displacement. One of my fears is positive displacement meters are going to soon develop salvage value in the market, because they've seen a dramatic decline that will continue with the fewer moving parts on the ultrasonic and other technologies that are coming along. And positive displacement is it's the analog versus digital. It's a 20-year commitment. That is a qualitative decision that will hopefully be part of your overall evaluation. One way to address the new technology is warranties. And that could be written into the requests and the proposals.
Yeah, that's certainly in there.
Okay?
So, just so we've got some votes here, I can go along with what you're saying. So, because there will be a final check for the board, inevitably. Ben, there's one other thing I would take into consideration with the project team when it comes to positive displacement meters versus newer technologies, and that is we have some state mandates on us to measure water loss, and this is going to become more incumbent upon the district over time, and we need to think ahead. So it may be a little bit more expensive, I don't know, maybe less expensive, but it may be one of the factors that you evaluate in whether we go with ultrasonic or not, because California has some very stringent and forthcoming regulations that are coming down the pipe.
Mike, it's worth pointing out here.
Please upon.
Yeah. Ultrasonic will show a higher consumption, 5 to 8%. However, this district has the good fortune of having such a low water consumption per residential unit that we meet the 2050 guidelines currently established by the state of California. So, based on the conversation I've had in one of our committees. So, I think we're safe.
We still have to measure.
But hopefully that doesn't become the driver.
So, yes, Director Sethy is correct. We still need to report the water loss, regardless how much water we have. But let's bring it back here then. So I am sure in your RFP, that's part of the picture, right? The reliability, the lifetime of the meter, the accuracy. I saw somewhere there's a line about water loss.
Yeah, absolutely. We set up the evaluation for folks to be able to evaluate all of these things. So there's additional revenue that will be included in the life cycle cost, the life cycle equation. On the financial evaluation side, there'll certainly be risk points associated with risk, the features of, risk of new technology that hasn't seen a full life cycle in a while. But as well as the enhanced features and functions that
So I think my point is they heard us and it's built in the process. So we just have to see what comes back, right?
We haven't built PDs out of the process.
Right, and I think the point that you made, Director Huang, about these are all factors.
Right.
But it's very possible, in fact probably guaranteed, that we're not going to bring back the very best warranty, the very best accuracy, the very best future-proof. You know, all of those elements will probably not be optimized.
Right, it's a compromise.
Right.
Right, it's an overall compromise that something will work best for us. It's not the best individual technology. I think we all understood that at this point.
They meet, whatever solution it is, it's going to meet certain business needs.
Right.
And in some areas, it's going to exceed our business needs. I think that's another way to look at it, as opposed to we're settling
I
for
see,
something.
you don't like the word compromise. Okay, we will not exceed in all areas, but
We won't get the
will
best of the best
exceed
in all
our
areas, but we will get
expectations.
good
Thank you.
in all areas.
All right. Moving on, pass it to us.
Another comment, if I might, on the business case and the broader picture. We're trying to measure the commodity function of our district. That cost is only about 20% of our bill. Maybe $20 million of a $150 million annual budget. So we're talking about spending $40 million to get a more accurate count on 20% of our expenses. That is not a good business model.
I think we've already passed this split,
Yes.
so I don't think that's part of the discussion.
So do you have all the answer you need, Mr. Chairman?
I think that this was a good discussion, and I think the outcome is something that we can work with, which is we have our marching orders for pre-RFP issuance, and I think we're planning on following our normal approach for any procurement when we come to the board with a recommendation based on but we also have received a relatively strong message that we need to be prepared to address a lot of questions at that time. That's what I heard. Yes, sir.
I wanted to point out that
You were talking about some vendor preference or technology preference. And so one of the reasons that you selected EMA was because EMA doesn't have that kind of a preference. Just as a company and any other clients that we've had. The thing that we've done here and that we expressed in our first presentation was that this RFP is written starting out with your business drivers. And so every requirement in the RFP points to those business drivers. And it's agnostic to technology and it's agnostic to vendors. So I wanted to make sure that we were silent on that.
That's a good reminder. Thank you.
Okay, great discussion. I have a couple of wrap slides. We'll see if they're still left. But bringing it back to our procurement process, our next touch point with the board would be at the results of procurement that we would present to the board, which is in that January time frame. All things considered, we'll have to iron out that schedule. And certainly, I wanted to point out that the key objective for staff in this phase 2 procurement phase of the project was to develop that RFP to solicit competitive proposals, and I think we're on our way to doing that. Hopefully you would agree with that. We select a single AMI meter and installation solution and award ultimately, we're looking to award the AMI deployment contract and the supporting contract. Right, so did I hit my checklist for the presentation? I think we presented our evaluation methodology and criteria and solicited feedback, and hopefully what I heard is that there's some consensus that our evaluation process will identify the best value solution to the district that we'll bring to the board for consideration. And that I provided a status update of where we're at in the project. So hopefully you know what my next steps are to get from here to that recommendation. With that, if there are any final questions, those were all the slides I had to cover with the goal tonight. But yeah.
Just something that was done in one other district where they took different types of meters, put them in tandem, and then read the readings. And when that was a selling point for one district to go with a certain type of meter. It's something we could do here at our headquarters and another place, and you could have a real read. So you're not necessarily looking at projected numbers and estimates and reports. We could ask for samples, put them in tandem, and see how they work.
Yeah, the trick there, of course, is the demand pattern, right? And so
put them in tandem so you'll be able to get a direct,
series, right? But still, it's the demand pattern that would govern the registration. If you were saying that an ultrasonic meter is going to have better low flow detection. We don't have demand pattern there, then that additional registration wouldn't show up in that study, as well as the degradation curve of the PD meter is over the 20-year life of the meter, and so that wouldn't show up in a short-term test, but certainly a long-term test would identify that.
Depending on where the
different locations to see.
Depending on where the board wants to go, that it might be something where we do a little pilot thing.
Yeah.
So kind of that's different than where we are now.
Yeah.
But we can look at that.
I could suggesting people put a flow restrictor on the intake to their hot water heater to get a much better under read on their water usage.
Okay. All right. No further comments. We'll move on to General Manager's report.
All right. Thanks.
Did I just hear a director give instructions on how to get a reduced water bill that reflects? I'm sure I misheard that. So, no, there are no general scores other than Go Warriors. I have not looked at the score.
Yeah.
I don't want anybody to say anything.
Director comments or agenda item requests, and we're well into the game.
Very minor one, we approved the logo, which is a great logo. It was pointed out that we might have cases where independent contractors might want to put that logo on their vehicles. I suggest we authorize them to remove ACWD if they're going to put it on their own vehicles or equipment, etc., so that we have and the attorneys can opt in on that if they wish.
Okay.
Okay, I have one item.
Go ahead.
Yeah. I brought up an item to our general manager and President Gunther, some staff too. We've been having a discussion about excess earthquake insurance and possible coverage for loss of revenue insurance as well. And so I've been endeavoring to look into other aspects of what FEMA offers to agencies like ourselves or does not offer. But as a result of that, I went through the Disaster Recovery Reform Act over the weekend, spent some time with that. It was signed into law last fall in October, and it turns out that there are quite a number of grant funding opportunities available that I feel that we should be looking at, as well as a lot of updates to FEMA's regulations that I think that staff would find of real interest. In particular, and this is not the only grant program they have that addresses our needs for a water district, but they're putting a primary focus on what they call the National Public Infrastructure Pre-Hazardous Mitigation Grant Program. And they have 4 FEMA webinars coming up in June, one each week, and one of, I believe it's the third one, is focused specifically on the grant application process. And I would really like to encourage our district, our staff, let's try to be first in line because there's limited funds here from what Congress approved, and I believe there's some real opportunity here. As part of this, I would like to have staff come back to the board with some kind of plan. Tell us what the district could do, what we could apply for. How could we plan for what they're calling pre-mitigation hazardous areas, specifically like for the Hayward Fault. And so maybe we put in a grant application for stockpiling equipment, for putting in a better emergency center here, co-locating things around the Tri-City area. I think there are a lot of possibilities, and there's quite a bit of money here. They also have grant funding available for addressing the management costs, and a program specifically intended for assessing damaged underground water infrastructure, which I think could all come into play for us. So I've sent a detailed memo to Mr. Shaver, and I'm hoping that staff will, see this as an opportunity, bring some money into the district and be better prepared.
So just really quick response. We have been tracking it. We have received some pre-mitigation grant money in the past, as well as post kind of disaster issues like the slope at Avalon Tank, I think was one. And so staff will be attending the webinars, and so our grant team will be evaluating these opportunities just like they evaluate all opportunities. And at some point, I think it does make sense to come back to the board just to kind of show the board what we're looking at and what we're thinking about. So no worries there.
There was one grant program specifically focused on water resources tied in with the Army Corps of Engineers, and it made me think, well, what happens if we have an earthquake? The fault line runs right by our fish ladders. What if a fish ladder splits in half? We've got to work with the Corps to fix something there. Well, that's an opportunity, for some funding.
Quick, about 20 years ago, FEMA did give a grant to Alaska for a regional communication system after post-disaster, because it allowed all of the various agencies to broadcast. And I was then serving on both the college board and this board, and the college has a local TV radio station. The ability to coordinate that in an emergency response where we could give real-time updates on a very frequent basis. Right now, after Loma Prieta, if you go back and remember, the only thing you saw was a bridge that had collapsed, a fire in San Francisco, and a couple other issues kept being repeated, but nothing in the local news was not available to you. So the ability to do that and then tie it into the internet would be a huge help in communication. And there may be grant money available.
Further comments? No further comments. I would like to call the meeting adjourned.
Just one last thing now that the meeting's adjourned.